Morning, Teacher Sally.
Good morning, please.
We handled the test. We are now doing Kafiri words.
Okay.
We
Thank
did
you.
the test last time.
Fine. Let me remove the test, right?
Okay, girls, let's start. We are going to begin our session. And we are going to request one of us, and that is Akelo Daniela, to lead us in a word of prayer. She put up the hand first.
Let's humble ourselves, word of prayer. Oh Lord Father, we want to thank you for yet another day. Thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for each and every good thing that you're doing in our lives. Lord Father, even as we go through this lesson, may you send down the Holy Spirit and the angels to be with us. May we understand each and everything that we are going to learn. Thank you for our teachers. May you continue to bless and multiply the works of their hands. Thank you for our parents. Thank you for all this I believed and prayed in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you for the prayer, and all of us are most welcome for today's session. Welcome back from the break last week, actually this week, but our first lesson, we went through the test, and right now we are embarking on the learning and teaching. When we went for the break, we had begun on the Kafiri Wars. And under the Kafiri Wars, we normally have the reasons or the causes of those wars. We also have the cause of the wars. We have the effects of the wars and the reasons why the Kosa were defeated. So right now, we are to go back to where we ended. And I've been told that we ended on the cause of the Kafiri Wars. By introduction, my name is Beatrice Nelima. I'm one of the teachers around. Some people could be knowing me. When we went for the COVID break, I was very new in the school, so majority of you could have not known me, but I'm on board with you and we are all welcome. We are going to look at the Kafiri Wars. And just for purposes of reminder, the Kafiri Wars took place in the eastern side of the Cape. Already we have done the Cape Colony. We've looked at the British administration. We first looked at the Dutch administration. We touched something on Batavia. We did something on the British administration where they brought in a lot of changes. And those changes contributed in one way or another to tension in the area of the Cape. So on the eastern side of the Cape, we have a big river called Fish River. We have a big river. Hello? We have a Fish River on the eastern side, and it's along that Fish River that the clashes majorly concentrated. The clashes were on two sides. On one side, we had the whites, and on another side, we had the blacks or the Africans. And in this case, the Africans were majorly the Kosa, a tribe among the Bantu, which was called the Kosa. And then on the white side, we had the Boers and then the British. The Boers entered the wars first, fought against the Kosa over a period of time. Then later, the British joined the war. So we shall look at the notes. I'm not sure whether Teacher Sally has been able to share the screen. Teacher Sally, are you able to share, or we do something?
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay, let me try to share it if possible.
Yeah. Yes, you do share.
Okay, so girls, we shall look at the screen. But one of the things that I'm going to request to you is that we shall have to be very orderly. Normally, in the name of discipline, we need Zoom etiquette. So we shall have to make sure that we control noise, and we shall raise up our hands in case there is a question or there is need for communication. You raise your hand, Teacher Sally will hope to pick on you, then you communicate as we move on. So we are going to look at the different wars which took place. But in the interest of introduction, we know that the wars took place in the eastern side. Do you see the screen? Do you see anything on your screen?
Yes.
It's fine.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. So I'm just trying to introduce this, that the wars were between the Kosa, who were the Africans, and from the Bantu community against the whites. And the first group of the whites to fight against the Kosa were the Boers. Then after the Boers, later the British also entered. You realize that the Boers were the first at the Cape. So when they continued to expand eastwards, they clashed with the Kosa. The Kosa were also expanding westwards, while the Boers were expanding. You remember the Dutch expansion, the colony expanded eastwards. So while the Boers were expanding eastwards, they clashed with the Kosa, who were also in large numbers expanding westwards. And the clash was around a river called Fish, or the Great Fish River in the east. And that's why we have it as the Eastern Frontier War. So in the introduction, you were told it has several names. In case you want any other of those names, we shall communicate to you, but there are several names, and these names have good reason for being apportioned. Some of them are apportioned because of what happened. Some of them are apportioned because of the leader who took part in one of the wars, like that. So let's go on, but for now we are going to limit our response, our engagement in the chat. We first, because we might spend more time in the chat, and we might spend more time in the chat and do less in the class. Otherwise, let's move on. Okay, so the wars took place from 1770s up to 1850s. Now, what we have to know is that the wars took place in a series. They were not just like right now we are looking at the course, but you remember when we were doing history of East Africa, we looked at the course of migrations. And normally when we are doing a course of anything, we know that it takes a period of time. So we divide the course in different stages. In the case of Kafir Wars, we have divided them into 9 different wars. So this shouldn't discourage you thinking it's too much work. We are going step by step. So the first war began, just a recap, the first war began in 1779. And this was because the Boers raided the Kosa land and took their cattle, and they left a Kosa herdsman dead. That annoyed the Kosa and they retaliated. So the Kosa went into a second war, which was 1789. They were expanding eastwards. And when they expanded eastwards, they clashed with the Boers. And this caused the second war. Then as we move on, we are just going through what we did. That the first war began in 1779, and it was because the Kosa were raided by the Boers, their cattle was taken, and their herdsman died. Then the second war is 1789. this was because the Kosa expanded in the piece of land, which is called the Zaaveld. The Zaaveld was a piece of land created between a river called Fish and another river called Sandy's River, from the word Sandy. Sandy's River, the land between Sandy's River and the River Fish was created, and the whites called it the Zaaveld. So the Kosa got added up in their population and they moved westwards. They found themselves in that land. And when they went into that land, it caused them to be fought by the whites. Then the third war was 1799. And then here is when we saw that the Kosa and some Khoi were thrown out of the Zaaveld. A lot of whites were killed by the Kosa, and then there came some peace. The fourth war, the British wanted to create peace in the district west of River Fish for white settlement. Now, when the British wanted to create peace, the whites, the Kosa were not happy with that. So it again caused conflict, which conflict opened up into another war. So this fourth war, the Kosa were forced out of the Zaaveld where they had settled. And when they were forced out of that land, they were pushed across the Fish River. This annoyed the Kosa. The Kosa got crowded. They became too many on the other side of the Fish River. And because they were overcrowded, they involved themselves in civil clashes. So the different clans among the Kosa during the Fourth War, the different clans among the Kosa fought against each other. One of the clans was on the side of the Gaika and then the Ndilambi. Now, of the Ndilambi and the Gaika were defeated by the Ndilambi. So what happened is that the Gaika appealed for assistance from the British. Around this time, this is now, we are going to the Fifth War, where we are beginning our lesson today. So the Fifth War comes on board from 1818 to 1819. And it has a background of tension between the two groups. So that's what we see. We see that on the screen, members. The Fifth War, do we see that, Teacher Sally?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so we are now looking at the Fifth Kafiri War, which took place between around that period of time as seen on the screen. And this has a background from the Fourth Frontier War, where there was conflict because of overcrowding on land between the Gaika and the Ndilambe Kosa. Those clans, they conflicted on land. And because they conflicted, since they were overcrowded, they ended up fighting each other. One of the groups was stronger. That is the Ndilambe group was stronger than the Gaika group. So the Gaika group, having been defeated and several of them died because of the Ndilambe, they appealed for assistance from the British. And the British were very willing to divide and rule the people, just as we know right from East Africa. So they sided with one clan or one group of the Kosa, who are the Gaika, and they fought against the Ndilambe. And this made the Ndilambe very disgruntled. Now we see here that later, again, the defeated Gaika and invaded. Later on, the Gaika were defeated and they invaded the colony. An attack on Grahamstown was repulsed and the Ndilambe were pushed to the Cape. This paragraph is trying to show us that there was fighting between the Gaika and the Ndilambe. The Ndilambe defeated the Gaika. The Gaika made appeal to the British, who sided with them. But the Ndilambe went ahead and continued to attack the British settlements. There is a town called Grahamstown. Graham was a British soldier He was a colonel and a British soldier who did a lot of fighting on the side of the British. So they named a certain town after him, and it was called Graham's Town. So in this case, on our last paragraph here, we see that an attack on Graham's Town was repulsed, and that the Landby were pushed to the Kei River. So girls, while we are studying the frontier wars, one of the things that we need to know, we have to mark certain important rivers. One of the rivers is River Fish. Another one is called River Kei. Another one is called River Kei Skama. Kei Skama. So for this time, during the Fifth War, the Landby group of the Kosa were pushed to the river called the Kei, and that created room for the whites to occupy Kosa land. So the next slide shows that in October 1819, the British forced the Kosa to accept that Gaika was the paramount chief of all the Kosa. Now, one thing that we should know is that the Kosa had several clans, and each of the clans had its own chief. They didn't have one paramount chief presiding over all the Kosa. Each group of the Kosa, each clan had its own chief or leader. So now we see that there was an alliance between the British and the Gaika. So in this case, girls, what we have to know is that the British, after making friendship with Gaika, they forced every Kosa to accept that Gaika was the paramount chief for all of them. That annoyed the rest of the Kosa, and they saw that Gaika was an enemy to them because they were not under Gaika per se. So that's what we see, that the chiefs of Milambe's Kosa were compelled to recognize Gaika's claim as paramount chief of the Western Kosa. This annoyed the rest of the Kosa. Now, in the event of doing that, the British demarcated land, which they called the Zaa-Veld. And I told you at first that the Zaa-Veld was a piece of land which was running from a river called Sandy Rivers to River Fish. So they created that land and called it the Zaa-Veld. And that Zaa-Veld was to act as a barrier so that on the eastern side of the Zaa-Veld, they are the Boers or the whites. And then on the western side of the river, of the Zaa-Veld, they were to have the whites. Then on the eastern side, the Kosa would live on the eastern side. So they pretended that that land was to be empty land, a neutral territory. Nobody was supposed to live there. But remember, it was formerly for the Kosa. And then we move on that from 1820, the British set aside £50 to be given to the British settlers in the Zaa-Veld. So the British claimed that they wanted to create peace between the Kosa and the Boers. So they demarcated, they chased away people from a piece of land, which we have called the Zaa-Veld, and planted there a group of people to settle there. At first they said, it is going to be empty land. Nobody's going to settle here for purposes of settling for peace. Nobody should claim for that land. Then later, but they had a hidden agenda to give that land to their own people. So later in 1820, the British brought ex-servicemen who had served in the war in Europe, because there were so many wars in Europe. So they brought some of the ex-servicemen from England. They came and occupied the Zaa-Veld. You realize that when the Zaa-Veld was occupied by the British settlers, the Kosa were unhappy because they had lost their land in the pretense of creating empty land or a barrier, and yet the British went ahead and brought their own people and settled there. So we are ending that slide seeing that unfortunately, the British strategy did not stop the wars. Just in case you have some small question in that fifth war, please ask so that we move on.
Sorry,
anybody-
teacher.
Yes,
Excuse me, teacher.
yes.
Sorry to take you backwards, but there is a question in the chat
Yes.
from the girls, and the question reads, may you it's not a question, but it's a request. May you kindly repeat the year for the second war, please?
Okay. I was running through that very fast. Hello, teacher.
Yeah. And then there is another question that why is it called the Sand River? Could there be a reason as to why it's called the Sand River?
As for now, I cannot commit myself, but maybe we shall Google it up and see why it was called Sand River. Just like we have Fish River, maybe there were so many. There was a lot of fish in the river. I'm not sure, but then we can go ahead and make some research, girls. So we are getting back for purposes of a reminder. Somebody's asking for the second war. We have that on the screen, members. Is she contented now? The second frontier war took place in that period of time, okay? She can take a screenshot and we move on.
Teacher, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay. So we are running very fast back to the 50th. We are finished actually the 50th war.
Faith Rebecca's hand is up. I don't know what you want.
So she can communicate to us. Let her unmute.
Is the Sand River also called River Limpopo, or they are different?
Okay, let me answer that. Girls, unfortunately, we've not been able to produce a map, but I hope when we get back to our physical classrooms, we shall draw some sketch for this. Let me get where we are supposed to be here now. So let me explain. When we look at the geographical setting of the region of Southern Africa, let's go back to the Cape. When you look at the Cape, we move eastwards. There is a big river called Fish River. But then around Fish River, there is also another river called Sandy River. Now, there is a very big river in South Africa, which is called the Orange River, which has a tributary of River Vaal. Now, River Limpopo is far above River Vaal. It's actually up beyond South Africa around Mozambique, River Limpopo. So it's not in the lower parts of South Africa. Right now we are looking at the lower end of River Orange towards the east. Thank you very much. Is there another question before we proceed?
Yeah, the chat has some more questions, teacher.
Yes.
Question one from the chat goes, teacher, was the Zouaveld for the Boers, for the Kosa, or for the Brit?
But remember that, repeat the question.
Was the Zouaveld, the Zouaveld for the Boers, the Kosa, or for the British?
Okay. Guys, let's get back to this. Thank you for the question. The Zouaveld was a piece of land created between River Sandys and the River Fish. Initially, the Kosa occupied that land. Then because of fighting, the Boers took over the land because of their eastward expansion. So the land was under conflict. The Kosa claimed ownership and the Boers claimed ownership. Then when the British took over control of Cape Colony, they wanted to end the conflict between the Boers and the Kosa. So one of the measures they put in place was to create an empty piece of land, which was to be a barrier that we are protecting the Kosa from attacking the Boers. Let me say this. For instance, we have, let's go back to Gayaza High School and then take an example that between the labs, there is a chapel and then we have Meta, okay? So the Zaveld was around the chapel area. And then on the side of the labs, we had the Boers. Then on this side of the classrooms and the Meta library, we had the Kosa. But then the land in between there, where the chapel is, was claimed by the Kosa and the Boers. At one time, the Kosa occupied it. They were fought by the Boers. Then at another time, the Boers occupied the same land. So the British who were in administration at the Cape thought of a measure to cause peace in the area between the chapel and the Meta library. So what did they do? They now demarcated the area around the chapel and the assembly ground to make it a neutral ground. No Zulu should, no Kosa should possess it, should claim it. Neither should the Boers possess it or claim it. So that became the Zaveld. Are we there? Teacher,
Yes.
another question?
Another question
Yes.
says,
there.
Another question, teacher?
yeah, that why, okay, someone I think hadn't yet understood what the Zaveld is, but now that you've explained further and told them that it was a neutral ground, I think I can withdraw the question. Let's move
Any
on.
other question? Any other question before we continue?
Another one has come in. That why
Yes.
were the British so much interested in the Zaveld land? Was it so special? What was so special about the Zaveld?
Okay, here we go, girls. We go back to the Cape. The first white people to occupy the Cape were the Dutch. Then because of certain problems in Europe, as we saw, the Cape was taken over by the British. The British were interested in South Africa. They did not want any other community to control South Africa, right from the Cape to the eastern side of South Africa, where we find a town called Durban. I think in geography, you could have already looked at that. If not, when we finish this lesson, please look at the map of South Africa. You'll find a town in the eastern side along the coast is called Durban. So the British were interested in controlling the whole of South Africa. And in this case, when they took over administration at the Cape, they wanted
I can't hear you.
Can't hear. I can't hear. Teacher?
Okay, let's wait for her. Let's wait for her to come. It might be a network issue, but she's going to be back. Maybe Teacher Sally. Teacher Sally, are you around? Teacher Beatrice, who is this one who is this one renaming with the full stop?
A dot.
With the dot. The teachers, I don't know, maybe there's a network challenge. Let's just wait for them. Let's just wait for them.
Just because it's new.
Teacher Joel.
Yes, Teacher Resty, you're welcome. So
I just think over she's just muted because
no, she's not.
I do.
She's not muted because she's a co-host. I think
She has
it's,
disappeared.
I think it's a network issue. I actually didn't know that you're here. Were you following the discussion, Teacher Resty? You can take it on from there as they rejoin because they've now left totally.
No, I'm back. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Let me make you co-host.
Something went wrong.
All right, welcome back.
Yes, please enable me share the screen.
Already you're already able to share.
Thank you. So I was explaining to the girls, somebody had asked why was the Reserve area so important for the British that they always wanted to take over it. So I was saying that all the land in South Africa was in the interest or in the to see the screen, girls. That we moved from the fifth war to the sixth. Okay. So by around 1834, the British had succeeded in pushing the Kosa across river fish, and they were in charge. We have already seen that they settled the white settlers in the Za Veld, or you can say Zu Veld. So after doing that, tension erupted among the Kosa again, just as we see the first paragraph. We see that some of the Khoikhoi and the Kosa began living over the side of river fish, but they were very insecure. Why? They needed more land. Their cattle had been taken. So we go on and see that there was a lot of bitterness and uncertainty among the Kosa because they had lost their cattle, they had lost their land after the British had fought them. So we see that large cattle thefts were followed by harsh military retaliations, and so many of the Kosa lost their cattle. And when they lost their cattle, they again moved back into the territory where they had been stopped from occupying, and that annoyed the British. And in this case, we see the notes that the Kosa were led by a person called Makoma. Some write him with the K instead of Q. So the leader called Makoma led people back into the Cape territory, and this annoyed the British. We move on. Sorry. The whites did one good thing, which they were always good at. They began to kill the leaders of the Kosa, or the African leaders. And because of such, they created more land. Girls, I wish you to follow us. We have a new district created. After the Zaveld, they pushed the Kosa farther away. Then they occupied more land, and the land they occupied, they carved it into a district, and they called that district the District of Queen Adelaide, or in some cases, they call it the Province of Queen Adelaide. Now, when this took place, remember that all these districts being created, they included the land which belonged to the Kosa. And we are looking here that after extensive military operations, the invasion was defeated. That means the Kosa were defeated. And the leader at that time was a British commander called Sir Harry Smith. As we move on, girls, Sir Harry Smith played a very big role in taking over territories for the British in South Africa. We shall even see him across River Orange when we study that area. So they created a district called Queen Adelaide, or a province of Queen Adelaide, and they added it to the colony, to the Cape Colony. This again annoyed the Kosa. So we can now see that every move that the British were doing was hurting the Kosa further and further. Then after that, there was another governor called Sir Benjamin Durban, who also tried to solve the problem in the eastern frontier, but of course he also failed. And during that time, during that time, the Africans were pushed again. In the Sixth War, the Africans were pushed again, this time far beyond another river. I mentioned that there are some important rivers along the coast, the east coast. One of them is the River Kei, another one, River Fish, another one called the River Kei Scammer. So this time in the Sixth War, they pushed them far east beyond a river called Kei, and that land was taken over by the British. So the British wanted to make the Boers very, very happy because the Boers were part of the fighting. So they handed over that land, which is called the province of Queen Adelaide, to the Boers. So in this case, we see that the Kosa have lost a lot of land. Kosa lost a lot of their land to the whites. The British who were in administration handed over the land to the Boers. Now we see in the next segment is that there were some good thinking people in South Africa, especially the missionaries, who were not happy, who were very unhappy that the Boers had taken over the land which belonged to the Kosa. So the Kosa had assistance from the missionaries. The missionaries appealed that the Kosa should be given back their land. In fact, we are told there's a missionary called Dr. John Philp, who even traveled to Britain and launched a case against the British administration in South Africa, having taken land from the Kosa and made them landless. So because of that appeal, the land was returned. So here we see that the Kosa lost their land. The British made it a province of Queen Adelaide, handed it over to the Boers. Then a missionary called Philip appealed and the land was returned to the Africans. So that annoyed that return of Queen Adelaide province, return from the Boers to the Kosa, annoyed the Boers so much that they even decided, later as we study, we shall look at a topic called the Great Trek, that they decided to even leave the Cape area or Cape Colony from a district of Graaff-Reinet. They got so annoyed and moved upwards in what we call the Great Trek. Okay. Is there any question on the Sixth War? I don't want to leave people behind. Teacher Sally, are you there?
Is a question?
Daphne has raised her hand. Maybe she wants us to help.
Daphne, yeah.
I wanted to ask
like they can ask you to keep on mentioning the new form districts, or they can't?
What are you saying?
I'm asking that, can they ask you somewhere to mention the new form districts according to the walls, or it's not asked?
Okay. Now what we need to know is that there is a district called Queen Adelaide, or sometimes other historians call it the province of Queen Adelaide. What we need to know about that is that in the Sixth War, as the expansion of the Boers, and then also the expansion or the search for land by the Kosa westwards, they lost it. And when they lost their land, the land was carved into something called a district of Queen Adelaide. And that Queen Adelaide land was given to the Boers by the British as a reward for having participated in the war. But there was an appeal made and the land was removed from the Boers, which contributed to the Great Trek because of the discontent among the Boers, having been removed away from the land that they had been given as an offer. If there's no any other question, we go on. And we are looking at the Seventh War.
There's no question so far. I think we move on.
Okay. So the Seventh War is one of the wars that is considered to have been meaningless in a case. Why? It was just about an axe. And it is said, there's a story behind this, that one of the Kosa chiefs stole an axe, and then he was arrested. When he was arrested, a Khoikhoi police escort, I think by now we know that the Dutch or the Boers had recruited the Khoikhoi into the force. The British used the Khoikhoi into the police force. So while the British were administering in the eastern frontier, there was a case of a thief, and a thief stole an axe. So when he stole the axe, the British sent a policeman to go and arrest and bring and take that thief to a town called Graham's Town. Remember, Graham's Town was named after a colonel, a British colonel called Graham. So the Khoikhoi policeman was busy escorting the thief of the axe, and then the Kosa could not spare him. They fought him, attacked him, killed him, and rescued their fellow Kosa who had stolen the axe. So in the event of that, the British administration wanted the murderer of the Khoikhoi policeman to be arrested. What the Kosa did was to hide away the murderer, and that made the British to wage a war against the Kosa. That brings us to the Seventh War, from that time of 1846 to 47, which is sometimes called the War of Axes. So the Seventh War was fought around that time. It is called, another name for the Seventh War is the War of Axes. And cattle unrest persisted through all that time. And there were a lot of patrols. So when the patrols were made, it's when we found the thieves. Then we also see on the last segment that the British established forts. The forts were to guard, were to offer security. And for that case, girls, can you allow me mention some of the forts as you write them down? One of them was Fort Harry. It is H-A-R-E. There's Fort Harry. We may have to add more forts later, but let's move on. Okay. We may ask ourselves, why did the British establish those forts? They wanted to create peace. So what this is showing us, what happened, what I've just explained. And in the event of the Kosa hiding away their brother, the murderer, the British waged a full-scale war, which we say the scorched earth policy, and because of that, the Kosa were defeated and they surrendered. In this war, the Kosa were greatly defeated, and the area between River Kei and River Fish was colonized. Now we can see that progressively, step by step, the British take over some land from the Kosa and give it a name. Then they add on, conquer some more land and change the name. Conquer some more land and continue to give it a different name. So in this case of the Seventh War, because of the War of Axes, because of that, the Kosa were defeated, they were fought, defeated, and their land was taken. Now they were pushed again beyond a river called Kei. So between Fish River and Kei River, the British took over that land and called it the British Kaffraria. Please let's join me to change the spelling of Kaffraria. It is K-A-F-F. K-A-F-F-R-A-R-I-A, Kaffraria, British Kaffraria. It was an area declared for the British, which they added to the Cape Colony. We see a hand there, Teacher Sally.
Okay, the hand is from Akelo Daniela. Daniela, please submit. Unmute yourself and submit.
Teacher, I have a question. So if we are asked why the forts were established, is it correct to say for peace and protection, or it was entirely for peace?
Okay, those forts were to ensure that there was security, which security would end up into creating peace. They were for security and safety of protecting the whites. Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Okay, so we said the correct writing here or spelling is the British Kaffraria. This piece of land between River Kei and River Fish was taken over from the Kosa, and the British named it British Kaffraria. Eventually, they added the British Kaffraria onto the Cape Colony. We shall see this as we continue studying. We are now looking at the 8th War, and it is sometimes called by that name. That name is for one of the leaders among the Kosa. That's why it is called by his name. Just like we mentioned that some of them are named after the different people. We are told that it was one of the most brutal and bitter wars. It lasted around two years, and it ended into the complete submission of the Kosa for the authority of the British. Okay, so let's look at what we have on the screen.
As we look at the screen, there are more questions this side of the chat.
Yes, please.
Why did the Kosa attack the British patrol out of nowhere?
It's not out of nowhere. The British had taken over land which belonged to the Kosa. So they were doing that in revenge for their land. Next, another question.
Could you please repeat the spelling of Kaffraria? Kaffraria.
Kaffraria. Okay, it is K-A-F-F. R-A-R-I-A. Kaffraria.
I would have written them in the chat, but John has removed the co-host rights from me. I can't chat with them.
Let them take it. It is K-A-F-F. R-I-A, Kafraria, Kafraria. Okay, any other question?
Akello Daniela has a question. Akello.
Teacher.
Akello.
So the wars happened because okay, teacher, I'm confused on why the wars happened. Was it because the first inhabitants had the most land and other people wanted to take it, or the first inhabitants enforced the wars to happen because they wanted to keep their land?
Okay, baby girl, let me get on board with you. We go back to the introduction of these wars or this topic. We realize when we're studying the Dutch, they expanded eastwards. One of the big reasons why they expanded eastwards was to get more land to occupy and establish their large farms. So while they were expanding eastwards, on the other side of the east, we had African tribes, and the strongest African tribe at that time were the Kosa. They were also expanding westwards, searching for more land because their population had also grown big and was continuing to grow. So in the event of each group expanding, they clashed. The biggest reason why these wars took place was because of land. Then after that, we also have another reason which comes in, is that each group, as it would move, would find the cattle for another group. For instance, the Kosa would see cattle for the whites and they would raid that cattle. Take it, then the whites also would follow and raid the cattle. And apart from that, there were also other factors like drought would force people to leave one area, like the Kosa would be forced to leave one area and move westwards to search for better pieces of land to settle. So in the event of those movements, they clashed and the wars took course. Any other question?
Teacher Beatrice, we have one minute, but then there are questions this side of the chat.
Yeah, I think we need to make the girls understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Let somebody ask her question.
How did the Kosa and the British communicate? Did they have translators?
We guess so. Okay. Now move on. If the question over.
Yeah.
So we see that in the 8th war, Mulangani led a group of people against the whites because he felt his authority was being tampered with. And when they did that, when Mulangani rose into a war, he was fought, and the British, as usual, defeated them. And this uprising is commonly called the Mulangani Uprising because it was led by a chief called the Mulangani of the Geika. So he told his people, because the Kosa were losing a lot of land, Mulangani told his people, just like the Majumaji, okay, we've not reached there, sorry girls, but he was a diviner. He told his people that the gods would give protection to the Kosa in case they waged war against the whites, and that the bullets would not kill them at all. So the Kosa went into a war, fought, but definitely they were defeated, and the prophecy never worked. And for your information, because of such a failure of the prophecy, it made the Kosa not to believe anymore in their religious people. So we go to the last one, and we are moving a little fast. That the last war took place around that time. So we have the Mufengu, sometimes are called the Fingo. Mufengu is a group of people in the east of the Cape, and they kept quarreling over land. And because of those quarrels, one of them, Gaika was a headman at somebody's wedding, at whose wedding, the initial fighting. So there was a fighting among the Fingo and the other group of the Kosa called the Galeka. So that fighting caused detention, and because of that, war took place. And when the war took place, the British, of course, came in. They knew any disturbance on the eastern side would cause confusion and disturb the administration. So they came in, fought the Kosa, defeated them, and signed a treaty in 1879, which ended the Kafir Wars. And that treaty, according to the notes, is called the Crelly Agreement. Since our time is up, I think we shall end here. Can we post, if there are any questions, maybe we shall put them in the chat and we shall try to answer them. Teacher Sally?
Yes, please.
If the girls have questions, they can post them in the chat. We shall look at them later. But this is where we have ended. Thank you for your participation and thank you for asking the questions. I hope we've understood a bit of it. Let's get back and do a bit of more revision for mastery. Back to you, Teacher Sally.
Thank you very much, Teacher Beatrice, for such a wonderful discussion for the girls. And the girls are also asking for the notes. They are requesting for the notes to be put in the platform. I don't know how we will do that. Since our time is out, I request that maybe one person, Eunice Nakuya can pray for us. Give us a closing prayer.
Oh God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the gift of life. And we thank you for this history lesson that we have been able to attend. Help us so that we can revise our books and master everything that our teachers teach. We bless our teachers that they take the time and come to teach us, and we thank you for them. In Jesus' name I've prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Please post your question.